how I want to treat this topic is by considering the Sabbath and what it really meant at its inception when the Sabbath first became a thing. And I think most of us know that the Sabbath was created on the seventh day when the world was finished. So let's start there by reading Genesis chapter 2, verse 2 to 3. Genesis chapter 2, verse 2 to 3.
And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that is it. He had rested from all his work which God created and made.
Amen.
Amen.
There are a couple things I want to take away from that. Eric, can you go back to Genesis chapter 2, verse 2?
And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had made.
Wait, and continue.
And he rested on the seventh day.
And he rested on the seventh day.
From all his work which he had made.
Okay. From that, what I want everyone to hear is he rested on the seventh day. So when the Sabbath day became a thing, the entire point was to rest. The whole point of the Sabbath day was to rest. Now, when you go to Genesis chapter 3, Mom, please can you read that again? Yes.
And God blessed the seventh day.
And God blessed the seventh
and
day.
It.
And sanctified it.
Because
that's okay. Thank you, Mom. He blessed it and sanctified it. So every Sunday when we come to church, one of the first things that is done, especially when the church is used for other purposes before the day or something before, is this church is sanctified. The four corners is sanctified. And then apart from that, we always come here. What is it? Is it the second prayer? Oh, sorry. Well, then apart from that, we also have that prayer of sanctification. So, that's the opening prayer. So the prayer of sanctification comes with, we ask God to sanctify the church, to sanctify the people coming into the church, and so forth. So when you sanctify something, you're asking God to consecrate it. You're asking God to separate it, to make it holy, to make it stand apart from all other things, in a sense, right? Having said that, God worked for 6 days, and on the seventh day, he now rested. He now blessed it, and he sanctified it. Rested, blessed, and sanctified. Those are the three things that happened on the seventh day, the Sabbath day. Now, when we go forward, we realize that if you read into Exodus or Genesis, one thing that you notice is that the Jews had this habit. They made the Sabbath day into, not that they made it, but in the Old Testament, they sort of created a lot of rituals, a lot of things that were supposed to be done on the Sabbath day. The Sabbath day became an entire event where you had to meet up with your family, eat together as a family, and do so much and do this and that. And so the Sabbath day now became what I would say a holiday. It became a weekly holiday. But if you go back to Genesis, one thing that you notice is that was not, those are the practices of the Jews. Like everyone else, the Jews had their own practices. Seeing us, we have our own practices. Lutherans, they have their own practices. Catholics, they have their own practices. But at the end of the day, they're just practices. And one thing I want to take away, before I even go into that, can somebody read Jeremiah chapter 17? The truth is, I want you to read 21 to 27, but it's kind of long. So maybe just read 26 to 27.
And they shall come from the cities of Judah, and from the places about Jerusalem, and from the land of Benjamin, and from the plain, and from the mountains, and from the south, bringing burnt offerings and sacrifices, and meat offerings and incense, and bringing sacrifice of praise unto the house of the Lord. But if ye will not hearken unto me to hallow the Sabbath day, and not to bear a burden, even entering in at the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, then will I kindle a fire in the gates thereof, and it shall devour the palace of Jerusalem, and it shall not quench.
The reason, and to give some explanation, before what was read, this particular passage talks about what would happen for you if you do honor the Sabbath day. This part that was read talks about what will happen to you if you do not honor the Sabbath day. And I want to take that part out because there are a lot of places in the Bible where you read about the Sabbath day and what was done on the Sabbath day. The point of all of this that I'm saying to you is that the Sabbath day is a day that has been set apart throughout from the very beginning of the Bible. The Sabbath day has been set apart. And the failure to keep the Sabbath day comes with its own punishments, its own problems. But one thing I will say now is that all of that, and this is an argument of its own, all of that was said in the Old Testament. Now in the New Testament, there is what I would consider hope for people who have situations that say, okay, I cannot be at church or I cannot honor the Sabbath day. So can someone read for me, sorry. Can somebody read for me Matthew chapter 12, verse 1 to 8. Matthew chapter 12, 1 to 8. And before someone reads that, let me just say what this is going on. Now, we've heard what happens if you don't honor the Sabbath day. Now, I want to give a special situation that Jesus particularly highlighted. Can someone read that?
At that time, Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were hungry and began to pluck the ear of corn and to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto him, behold, the disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day. But he said unto them, have you not read what David did when he was hungry and they that were with him? How he entered into the house of God and did eat the showbread, which were not lawful for him to eat, neither for them which were with him, but only for the priest? Or have you not read in the law how that on the Sabbath day the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? But I say unto you that in this place is one greater than the temple. But if ye had known what this means, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, you will not have condemned this guiltless.
Praise the Lord. There are two things I want to take from that. The first thing is, in this part of the Bible, Jesus is basically saying that in the Old Testament, the word is basically, if you don't honor the Sabbath day, you're punished. There's punishments for that. In the New Testament, Jesus is saying that the Sabbath day is to be honored, right? He's never questioning that, because if you look through the entire Bible, when Jesus was going through his journey, the Sabbath day was always a day where he was at the temple and he was working. He was always at the temple. But the point is, on the Sabbath day, he never said that it should not be honored. But he made it clear that there are situations where things happen and people are condemned. Guiltyless people are condemned. And the specific example that he used was the priests that go to church on Sunday. Are they not working? They're working for God. Are they to be condemned for working on the Sabbath day? And that's a very good question that I don't think a lot of people even considered at that time. Or what? Did you think that, did the Pharisees think that what the priests were doing in the temple was not considered work? Like, what excuse do you have for allowing these priests to work, but saying everyone else cannot work on the Sabbath day? It ends by saying, for the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath day. Okay? For the Son of Man is Lord, even on the Sabbath day. When I read this particular verse, what I got from this was that the Sabbath day is a day, and man is man. One is living, one is not living, in a sense. So, if you try to enforce something on an entire population of people without considering the fact that one is living and one is not living, then you're particularly leaving yourself open to a failing situation. And I say that to say that a lot of people tend to read the Bible and they tend to see it as a book. And not to go too far into this, that is the issue. The Bible in itself has never been a book. It's never been just paper. It's never just been words. It's been more than that. And unless people read it and tend to see more than what is on paper, they tend to miss most of the message. And that's what's happening here with the Sabbath day. And I think that's one thing, and when I read that Matthew chapter 12, that's what I took away. I said, okay, wait, I feel like right now, Jesus is saying, all right, you guys have read this word and you've stuck to this word, but you've completely forgotten that it's been like 1,200 years and things have changed, and there's particular situations where things are not going to be what they were back then. Back then, I don't think they had priests that come to church on Sunday, or I don't even think there was that type of habit going on. The point is, things change and things evolve and people change. A couple years ago, this same sermon was given here by Oduyebo, and he spoke, and the question was asked. I remember it was for some reason, it was very controversial. The question was, what about for people who have to work on Sundays? And Oduyebo, he pretty much just said, there are situations where things are out of your control. If your job tells you that you have to be at work on Sunday, there's not much for you to say. You either work or you work there or you don't work there. There are situations, and he made that clear. I think he did a good job of making that clear. But having said all of that, there is another thing that I want to make clear. Can someone read Nehemiah 13, verse 19 to 21? Nehemiah 13, 19 to 21. 13, 19 to 21.
Ó sì ṣe nígbà tí ẹnubodè Jerúsálẹ́mù bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí í ṣú òkùnkùn pẹ̀lú ṣáájú ọjọ́ ìsinmi, mo pàṣẹ pé kí a ti ilẹ̀kùn, kẹ́nikẹ́ni má sì ṣí i títí di ẹ̀yìn ọjọ́ ìsinmi. Nínú àwọn ọmọkùnrin mi ni mo fi sí ẹnubodè kí a má bàa mú ẹrù wọlé wá ní ọjọ́ ìsinmi. Bẹ́ẹ̀ ni àwọn oníṣòwò àti àwọn tí ń ta onírúurú nǹkan sùn lẹ́yìn odi Jerúsálẹ́mù ní ẹ̀rìn kan tàbí ẹ̀rìn méjì. Nígbà náà ni mo jẹ́rìí pé wọ́n, mo sì wí fún wọn pé èéṣe táyé fi sùn lẹ́yìn odi. Bí ènìyàn bá tún ṣe bẹ́ẹ̀, èmi ò fọwọ́ bà yín. Láti àkókò náà lọ ni wọn kò sì wá lọ́jọ́ ìsinmi mọ́.
God bless you, man. Thank you. Can someone read that in English for me?
And it came to pass that when the gate
That should be remembered, and a day that has been remembered for thousands of years, and different civilizations. As I was coming up with this sermon, I read about the different practices of people on Sabbath day. I read about the Christians. I read about Catholics. I read about Lutherans, Muslims. I read about so many different people. And one thing that was clear to me was that different people had different beliefs. Lutherans were like, the Sabbath day is not really a thing anymore. That after Jesus Christ, that it's just a day, but Jesus Christ has opened the way for us. Catholics believe that the Sabbath day is strictly for worship. You have to fellowship with God. You have to come to Him and see Him and seek Him and glorify Him. There are so many beliefs about the Sabbath day. Everyone has their own thoughts. That it should just show you in that very moment that the Bible in itself is a living creature that we all need to take our time to understand and come up with our own understanding of it. And just to be clear, a lot of people use this particular reason to misinterpret the Bible. But also, that doesn't mean that because someone is misinterpreting the Bible, doesn't mean that the rest of us should stop interpreting the Bible. That's not how it works. So, I'll read it real quick. Nehemiah 13, 19 to 21. And it came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, I commanded that the gates should be shut and charged that they should not be opened till after the Sabbath. And some of my servants set I at the gate, and there should no burden be brought in on the Sabbath day. So the merchants and the sellers of all kinds of ware lodged without Jerusalem once or twice. Then I testified against them, and I said unto them, Why lodge ye about the wall? If ye do so again, I will lay hands on you. From that time forth, came they no more on the Sabbath. Okay, so having said what I just said about there being situations where there are circumstances where the Sabbath day require that someone may work or someone may have to engage in activities that are not going to church. There's one thing I want to make clear. At the end of the day, like most things, and one thing that this verse, at the end of the day, most things in Christianity require that you approach it as an individual. And you approach it situation by situation. No one, the Bible made it very clear that no one has the right to judge you. But at the same time, you also have to look into yourself. Are you choosing to not honor the Sabbath day? Or is circumstances forcing you outside of your comfort zone? Do you want to honor the Sabbath day? Because, and I'm asking this question, and I'm asking you all this question, because in the moment when I was making this sermon, I was actually on the phone with someone who was not going to be coming to church, going to church on Sunday, and their reason was they had a paper that they had to write. And I said, and I thought to myself, I didn't say anything at the time. It was funny because I was doing the sermon and having this conversation at the same time, but that was the most of my words concerning that. But in my head, I was thinking, is that good enough? Is that a good enough reason to not come to church? Is this paper due tomorrow? Is it due at the end of is it due Sunday evening? Or another thing, did you not know you had to come to church on Sunday? I mean, I'm not asking you these questions, but I'm wondering, is that a good enough reason not to be at church on Sunday? I mean, to not honor the Sabbath day? And that's just a circumstance where I'm saying, apart from work, there are circumstances where you may not be at church on Sunday. But you have to ask yourself, is the reason why you're choosing not to be at church, and don't get it wrong, even if your boss is the one that's telling you to be at work, you have to be at work on Sunday, it's still your choice. It's not your boss's choice, it's your choice to not be at church on Sunday, to not honor the Sabbath day. But I'm asking you, just wondering, have you asked yourself, is your reason for not being at church on Sunday good enough? Ask yourself that. I'm not going to ask you that because I don't have the right to tell you whether or not it is. But ask yourself, is your reason for deciding to not be at church on Sunday good enough? And if you feel it is, then that's between you and God. There's no other intervention. There's no outside intervention because no one, and Jesus made it very clear, no one should condemn you. No one has the right to condemn you. In fact, in the act of condemning you is, in this fact, wrong. So no one has the right to condemn you. What I will say, you have to consider those questions. Some of us are in school. Some of us are at work. There are many, many circumstances that may cause us to be. If you have an exam Sunday morning and you have to, for me, that's a reason why I wouldn't come to church on Sunday. I've never had an exam on a Sunday morning, but if that was a thing, I would not be at church on Sunday. And I feel like that's something that excuses me in a sense. But at the same time, I want to make it also clear that the Bible, even no matter what everything was going, even with the coming of Jesus Christ, the Sabbath days has always been honored. And people tend to take the Old Testament and say that it's the Old Testament, therefore the coming of Jesus Christ has changed things. And it has. But the Sabbath day has not changed. It is still a sin to not keep the Sabbath day. Because on the Sabbath day, again, God rested. He blessed the day and he sanctified it. And no one is taking away from that or up from that activity. Now, and going back to what I said originally, the Jews decided to add extra things into the Sabbath day, extra rituals. That was their own practices. For us, we decided that on Sundays, we would gather together at church and we would worship God. That is our own way of keeping the Sabbath day. But it goes further than that. It goes further than that because apart from that, after you leave church on Sunday, how you choose to spend your time matters. This honoring the Sabbath day doesn't come to an end after church, is what I'm trying to get at. If you go to work after church on Sunday, in some sense, it's also true that you've not honored the Sabbath day. Because apart from worshiping God, that day you're supposed to rest. Because what? God rested, blessed, and sanctified the Sabbath day. So, all work, all activity on the Sabbath day is not allowed. Everyone has, and going back, everyone has their own circumstances, but that fact hasn't changed. Therefore, at the end of the day, whenever you're making a choice to do something on the Sabbath day, you have to ask yourself, are you choosing, is this a must? Must this be done today? And if it doesn't have to be done today, then don't do it. It's one of those black and white situations. You either do it or you don't do it. Ask yourself, is it worth doing today? And if it's not worth doing today, then don't do it. Because at the end of the day, it's your own personal journey with Christ, but there were things that were stipulated at the very beginning, and you, as an individual, have to keep it.